Hello, everybody. Hello, world. Welcome to another episode of Tech Engineering Lounge. My name is James, and along with my friend Camy.
Hello.
Good morning, good afternoon, Camy. We will be your hosts, and we have a special guest with us today, Mr. Raoul D'Cunha. Raoul, welcome to the lounge.
Morning, good afternoon to everyone as well. Thank you for having me on here.
Great to have you join us. So I guess before we get too deep into the meaty stuff, Raoul, I'll get you just give a quick introduction of yourself. Say hello to everyone. Who are you and what do you do, and what brings you here?
Sure, yeah. So hi everyone, I'm Raoul. I am currently an engineering manager at Atlassian. So my team works on internal tooling at Atlassian. So we help other engineers and other teams build your favorite products on our platform. What brings me here is James and Camy. So I've been a really good friend of James for a long time now, and he sent me an invite, and I was like, wow, this is a topic which James will announce, and you could probably see in the title of this video that is very close to my heart. So I thought, this is a good opportunity for me to have a good chat with Camy and James and see where things go.
Yeah, cool. All right. So thanks for joining us. So yeah, the topic today, Camy and I have talked a little bit in the past around this and had some interesting conversations, and we wanted to dive a little bit deeper on this idea of T-shaped engineers. And sort of something that goes with that is cross-functional teams, which to me are kind of like T-shaped teams. But we'll start with T-shaped engineers and kind of see where we end up. Should probably explain what that means, because not everyone will have heard the term. I believe it comes from Agile practices, is this concept of a T-shaped engineer. If you imagine the letter T, so it's got a line across the top and a line going down the middle, and it refers to the skills of an engineer. So you have a wide set of skills, but one skill that goes really, really deep. So you're kind of specialist in one thing, but you have some skills in all these other different areas. So we want to kind of to sort of dive into that and see what that means. So I guess where we start is it important to be a T-shaped engineer, and why, or why not?
Yeah, I think to contrast that a bit further, just for the benefit of people that might not be too familiar with the terminology, if you go through a standard university course or a standard boot camp or structure, you sort of end up being what's known as an I-shaped engineer, where you're proficient in just one aspect of engineering, right? It doesn't mean that you work by yourself. It's not that really. So I think being a T-shaped engineer actually is quite crucial to working in a team. And that means that, you have a broad skill set, you're less reliant on other people. It also helps you wear different hats at different points of time in your work while you're working in a team. So you can view things with a design perspective or testing perspective, and so on. Specifically for engineering, what I would say is that it can be related quite closely to what's deemed as a full stack engineer in the team. So you're not focused, primarily on the front end or back end or infrastructure or ops, but you are comfortable working in those domains. You may not exactly be an expert in all of those fields, but you might for example, be a strong back-end engineer, but you've also got your fingers and toes in front end and the other aspects of engineering.
Yeah.
I was just going to add that Atlassian is actually such a cool place to work at anyways, because I think the entire concept of an engineer and an engineer being able to do a lot of things actually pretty much started, Atlassian was at the forefront. Where I work currently, we don't fully do that. And I think majority of the organizations don't fully kind of have incorporated that engineering model. So where I currently work right now, there are testers and they're developers, and then there are BIs and product owners, and we are all part of a full stack team. And then as a tester, I'm supposed to be a T-shaped tester or organizations would usually be hiring a T-shaped tester or a T-shaped developer. And I was hoping we could drill down into a little bit into that as well. Like, what does a T-shaped tester actually look like? Or what does a T-shaped developer actually look like? Yeah.
I think that the first time going back many, many years ago into my career, the rubber hit the road a little bit when I found myself as a tester having to make product decisions. We would find problems and someone would need to make a decision on, what's going to be best for the business. And product manager or product owner was absent or otherwise, too busy to engage with this sort of decision making. And so I was like, well, suddenly this falls to me. My options are, well, that's not my job. Or to start embracing a little bit of, okay, what does it mean to make decisions like this, and how do I build that skill set? I don't have to be an expert at it, but starting to flesh that out a little bit. Similarly with as a tester, our last conversation was really interesting about sort of should testers need to code or not, right?
Yes.
And as a tester, I don't need to know how to code, but knowing how to code helps and sort of builds out that top of the T, or even just knowing how to read code. I don't have to be great at coding, but, being able to write an if statement feeds into how good a tester I am and can, means I'm not sort of relying on someone else to explain that stuff to me and that sort of thing.
And I think the environment that you're in also plays a significant factor, right? Just as Camy was mentioning. So, for example, by that, what I mean is if you're working in a startup, the general assumption is that you wear many hats. You don't exactly fit in one bucket. You might have a really small team. You may not even have a product manager or a designer. And then it's generally all on to the engineer themselves to be able to, work flexibly and fill in those gaps where needed. Whereas contrasting that with a bigger company, as is the norm these days, it's not always the case, but you may end up in a more distributed team across different time zones and geographies. And then you may end up in the situation that you were describing earlier, James, where the product manager might be offline, it might be 9 p.m. at night for them, and a decision needs to be made. So taking ownership and charge of the responsibility, seeing that across is definitely an aspect that I would consider to be part of the T-shaped engineering model.
Yeah. Yep. I think another situation where it's been useful to me is I spent some time while we were working together, I think, Raoul, sort of learning about React. I'm never going to be a React developer. That wasn't my intention, but I just learned how to, went through some tutorials, learned some basic stuff. And what that was kind of for fun. But what I didn't realize is that actually meant that later on, when I was having conversations with our engineers about things like state and props, I knew what they were talking about instead of them being arbitrary sort of concepts. And that, that makes me a better tester, right?
A lot of the skills and sort of techniques and all that you learn, I think it's standard across engineering, across all disciplines in most cases. So whether you're engineering or testing and so on, I think if you add those tools in your toolkit, it then unlocks a whole bunch of different conversation and abilities that might not necessarily be easier before, right? And you don't have to be an expert in that field. You may just have delved deeply, but human brains are really good at pattern matching. So you might recognize the situation and say, hey, I remember this. This is how, things worked in React, and now we are in a different land. But it's probably similar. And in most cases, it generally is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like for a T-shaped tester, or like if your expertise is in quality, what would a T-shaped test engineer or quality engineer look like? Like, I think it varies depending on how much experience you have. So someone with like a 10 plus 15, 20 year experience, they would have a varied set of skills. But if you're just starting off fresh, what advice would we want to give people, or like where they can like start to be more T-shaped?
My recommendation would be to not shy away from different aspects of your role. So I know it's standard in some companies to sort of, let's say, not benchmark, but bucket test engineers in different aspects, right? You might have your manual test engineers, you may have your automation test engineers, but a lot of times you're working on the same product. So I think this really falls down to the umbrella of ownership, feeling that responsibility and taking charge of things. So you may be a manual tester, but why not give automation testing a try? You could slowly, work your way around it, understand the different aspects of it, and then maybe even contribute to engineering or discussions with product or design, and so on. So just slowly increasing the scope of your responsibilities. And if you look at most career ladders, that's actually maps very closely to that, because as you get more and more senior, the scope and impact of your role increases as well.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think with engineering, it's the same sort of, specializing in front end or back end or databases or infrastructure. Like, these specializations happen and they're good, but, as a front ender, some knowledge of how your back end works is going to be really useful. And so, like you say, don't shy away from it. Don't pretend it's not my domain, so I'm not going to care about it. It's going to be better for a contributor for their career, just to focus on learning some of that stuff. It's going to be better for your organization, your team as well. Yeah.
And sometimes it might be hard to recognize these opportunities, right? Especially if you're earlier on in your career and it's already very overwhelming, right? You're in a new role, you have like a million things that you can learn on and work. Do you focus on the technical aspect of, for example, testing or engineering, or do you focus on the product? You learn more about the product, and there's like a million decisions that need to be made. And it's always useful to ask for help and also to express your interest to your manager. So you could tell them that, hey, I'm interested in so-and-so domain, so that the next time an opportunity arises, they can tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, I remember, you were interested in this area. Maybe you want to give automation testing a go, or look into, UI diffs, lots of things.
Yep. And I think just dedicating the time to that as well, like, block out an afternoon and do a tutorial, learn a new skill. There's very few reasons I think it would be a bad idea. More often than not, you're going to get something from that, even if it turns out to be something you're not directly using. Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed, I think it's like testers and also like maybe like developers who are early in their careers, not quite understanding CI/CD pipelines and how the releases work and how do we take a change from our machine all the way to production. And I think that's kind of like with the entire DevOps culture, people moving to like on-demand releases, like really fast releases. That becomes a quintessential skill to have to kind of like understand all of that CI/CD, how that works. A lot of people, it's shocking how a lot of people still don't know. Because it's like once you set up the pipelines, they just keep on working until it's broken, then someone's got to fix it. So it's easy to ignore those configurations. So I think that's one of the things that my advice would be just kind of like understand how CI/CD works and how Jenkins works. Like Jenkins is so basic. And depending on whatever platform you guys work on, Kubernetes, Docker, AWS, like kind of like understand the basics of how a change is taken from your machine all the way to production. And that knowledge in itself can be very, very powerful.
I totally agree, especially if you look at, I'm going to focus on the engineering aspect over here, on the engineering career ladder down the individual contributor path, right? As you get to senior and beyond, I'd say this is absolutely critical to your growth, understanding how the broader aspects of the system or the products that you work on. A lot of times, if you're on call or you're dealing with various issues, some of these problems can be fundamental to the platform that you're operating. It could be problems with build and deployment that will be really hard to debug and triage if you have not built at least a base level understanding of how all these systems come together and work in play. There's usually more than one, right? It's not just
my gosh, yes.
It's like it's a jigsaw puzzle. So understanding how that all fits into the big picture is really valuable.
It's 100%. Yeah. And this is so interesting because our next episode is going to be on systems thinking, which James and I have also been talking about for a while now. So yeah, we've got one of my good friends joining us for systems thinking. And I think this is absolutely like the more senior you are in your career. And if you worked at a place like more than 5 years, then you should, like how these systems are hanging together. Like front end is just like, from what I understand, front end is only like the entire, like the iceberg behind it, like the middleware, the APIs, the microservices, and the backend. That's pretty much where majority of the heavy lifting happens nowadays. Front end pretty much just like renders whatever information is being provided by the endpoints, right? So yeah,
depends,
and that
depends. I can show you some front ends.
I know.
But
like React and so on, it can get quite involved, I'd say, and I think there's significant layers of complexity even there. Sometimes even more than the back end. For your database.
Which is a nice segue to kind of like understanding how a T-shaped developer is different from a full stack developer. Like, how would you define a full stack developer, and how is it different? And the same thing for like how is a full stack tester different from a T-shaped tester or an engineer?
I wouldn't say they were different necessarily. Full stack, when I think of full stack, I think you work across the back end and front end. I think even a full stack developer is going to end up leaning one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
A hard one. Yeah, it's a hard one. That's why I asked. Yeah. Raoul, do you have any?
Common to see people specialize in one aspect, right? And this is generally the area you start your career, and you're fresh out of university, or you've gone through a boot camp, or you've done some coding on the side, and then this is where you come in. You'll either join as a front-end engineer or a back-end engineer. In most cases, it might not be in your title, but the work that you do generally is scoped to one area to make it easy for you to get onboarded and get contributing faster and at a higher level. So that is generally the area that people tend to be more comfortable in due to how much time they have spent on there. But then building that sort of that top of the T, that wider bar is where you start delving into back end. And generally, I think if someone terms themselves as a full stack engineer, my personal assumption is that they're comfortable working across the stack. So you could, in most cases, throw any task at them, and they will see that across from start to finish. But if someone calls themselves a backend engineer, then I think that implies an assumption that they might not be so comfortable getting something done on the front end side of things.
Yeah, like my understanding of full stack developer, and I think this is limited to my experience and what I have seen. So when I hear of a full stack developer, I usually think of like they know front end, and it's usually like web. And then they're also capable of doing the APIs. And that's the prominent combination that I have seen when it comes to full stack developers. I think some of the Android developers, if they use Kotlin, Android uses Kotlin, and if your APIs are in Kotlin, it's quite a nice, like they can easily do it. But I've hardly ever seen like a mobile iOS developer who is also proficient in microservices or in web. Like that's a hard combination. And I've never seen a developer or an engineer who can code in JS, React, iOS, Android, and then can also build microservices. I think there might be a few startups, like it probably happens at startups, but usually, my experience is mostly in like established organizations, and it's usually experts that they hire.
Yeah, I definitely think you have those people that will do all of those things, but especially like in mobile, often you're specializing in mobile. That's the bottom of your T,
Yeah.
But with things like React Native, like muddies the waters on that, right? Because now there's if I understand it rightly, there's quite an easy path from React Native to front end development, or vice versa. It's JavaScript all the way down. Raoul, you might know better than I do on that because I haven't done any React Native work. But
yeah, I think to add to that, really, what happens with mobile is sort of like a unique case because you have this entire ecosystem built around it, right from start to finish, where you're sort of focused on the entire experience. You have the front end aspect of it, which is whatever's rendered on your app, but there's also like a backend aspect to it that's local to the app as well. And generally, those sort of end up involving the majority of your time and work. So I think mobile is generally an interesting sort of exception almost to the rule, because you're sort of enclosed in this area. But then when you're on web development, generally you'd see more engineers being flexible to working across the front end or the back end stack. And in fact, I think these days, if you deem someone as full stack, there is an expectation to also work on infrastructure, also work on build tooling, deployments, and so on. And this is more on the DevOps side of things. But full stack can be a very controversial term, because a lot of people might not view themselves in that manner, and it can be viewed more as a recruiting tool rather than sort of an engineering term.
It is. So I am a full stack tester, and my team is a cross-functional team, but and this is where it becomes interesting. It's like the testers are T-shaped, so is the product owner and the BI. But then we have specialized developers. So we have mobile developers who specialize in iOS and Android. And then we have API developers, and then web developers, and web and API developers, they cross over. And the mobile developers, they cross over across iOS and Android. But I test and I do automation across all four of those. And the BA and the PO kind of like they manage like all four platforms as well. And it becomes quite complicated. So then we want to hire another full stack tester or a full stack test engineer. And as amazing as it looks to kind of like hire, to build that job description, but when you look at the CVs that you receive, it's pretty much like an impossible combination of skills that you are looking for. Like have you had some experiences?
A lot of this also aligns to like industry expectations, right? I view job requirements more as a wish list than as an absolute requirement, right? There are 5 things on here. If I'm generally, I think the advice that I've received from other people is you don't need to meet 100% across those skills. But I think this also treads towards how do you keep your job openings more open and introduce a wider pool of diverse candidates to it. Because when you have hard requirements onto your job descriptions, you may end up having people self-select themselves out of it just because they may view it as a hard requirement compared to more of a nice to have or something that you can pick up on the job, because people can and will learn on the role on the job that they have. So no one's fixed in point at a certain time.
Yeah, this is probably a little bit off the beaten track, but something's been described to me in terms of hiring as looking for pack-shaped people. So as if you've got a pie chart of all the requirements you've got, and you want your person to have enough of those to look like a Pac-Man, if you can imagine the circle and the. So you don't want it to look like a piece of pie. You want them to have more than that, but they don't have to have everything. If that sort of makes sense. So pack people, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. So like in my case, or usually most of the places that I've worked at, you look for one specialization. So it could be mobile or it could be web or it could be APIs. And then when you interview them, you can tell that if they have the aptitude and the willingness and a growth mindset to be able to learn other platforms and other skills. And I think that's a really good place to start with. And even for someone like just beginning their career, either in testing or in development, I would probably give them the same advice, like try to learn one first. And because once you've learned one platform, one programming language, your learning curve for others is relatively low. And it becomes quite easy to kind of like if you already know mobile, it's not going to take you a very long time to start learning JS. That's usually my advice to people who are starting. But people who've been in the industry like us, who've been in the industry for a while, decade, 2 decades, I think it's quite nice to push ourselves to try something new. And we talked about this in the last episode, which we haven't released yet. But like that's where I found myself a couple of years ago. Like I've done mobile for such a long time, and it was just getting boring. And I've worked across like at least half the New Zealand banks, and I've pretty much been doing the same job at every bank, and it became quite boring. So I picked up APIs, then web, and now I'm doing full stack. And for now, it's quite cognitively taxing, but I think like that's where the growth lies as well. Yeah.
Because you, as you get familiar with different aspects of your role, it can become a chore. You're doing the same things over and over again. So this does help introduce variety and additional cognitive load. Assuming that you're okay with that at that point in your life, and you have a healthy work-life balance as well.
Yeah.
I think that's why this is important for leaders too, right? Is to acknowledge that you need your team to be doing this stuff, because if they get bored, they're going to go and do something more interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to say,
I want to change subject, Camy, so you go.
I just want to say one thing that because my is a full stack team, but then we are all T-shaped individuals. One of the things that I learned is that the team is cross-functional. The individuals are never cross-functional. The individuals are T-shaped, like the correct terminology. I think a lot of people use like these terminologies interchangeably, which is not accurate. So the team is always like full stack and cross-functional. The individuals are, when we talk about individuals, it's always T-shaped. We should be talking in T-shape. Does that make sense? Like it does make sense, right? Like,
yeah. I think probably to add to what you're saying, that you want the team to be cross-functional. You could end up with a team that has, all Rust specialists, or something really out of it, which could end up to be a problem, right? So you want to craft your team in such a way. I do want to talk about cross-functional teams, but before we do that, Raoul, before we started recording, you were saying some interesting stuff about communication. And I want to sort of dive into that.
Yeah, and I think Camy and both you, James, have sort of touched over this. But generally, if you view a T-shaped, engineer, tester, or an individual in our fields, we sort of focus on the more technical aspects of their role. So, do they know Java? Do they know C#? Do they know Kotlin? And those are sort of the requirements, or how we structure that T-shaped tree. But one aspect that I think is really crucial is communication. And I think this is quite core. And when we talk about cross-functional teams, I think this will help emphasize and drive that point. But even as an individual, I think this is quite core to working effectively in your role. So that means, being able to communicate to your peers, to your leaders, being able to, share status updates, not only the good ones, but also the bad ones, being able to at a higher level, then eventually, motivate and influence people and drive roadmaps and so on. And this is probably really important as you move higher and higher up your career, because you sort of move away from going from communication as a nice to have to a must have. And then your technical skills go away from being a must have to a nice have. So that there's this like balance that sort of shifts on there.
Yeah, I think that's especially important because, like you're saying, as your career grows, the more you have to talk to more people. We've got people who are new to the sort of the senior engineer band at the moment, and are discovering that as part of that, they're being pulled into more and more conversations, and they're just across more things, and that means engaging with some of that stuff that they may have not done before. So that's super important.
And how do you encourage that? Like, how do you shape people who are an engineer, or kind of like in the start of their career or an intermediate stage? How do you encourage? Because this is like a hard one to nail down again, right? Like soft skills, communication. So how do you create those opportunities? I mean, same at Fergus, James. Like, are you guys proactively thinking about creating those opportunities for people that could be modeled into future engineering leaders?
Definitely. And I think not everyone is, outroverted and able to, speak up or voice their opinion at, any given point in time. So it's very important to create these spaces where people can feel like they can contribute. And this sort of then helps them, move down that path. And that could be as simple as, inviting them to a meeting. So you might have, an architectural level decision or a decision that needs to be made, but making sure that even your junior engineers are involved. They may not feel comfortable yet. contributing to that process, but getting them familiar definitely does help. And this is one aspect that I feel remote working works really well in, because I feel that it provides a more even platform for people that are shy to be able to contribute to various discussions, along with doing things asynchronously via documents, requesting for comments or writing things down. Definitely helps even that barrier for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. I think just finding opportunities, like inviting them to meetings, like you're saying. One thing that works for me in terms of drawing people out is if we're in a meeting to make sure I ask for the opinion of someone who's sort of more introverted and get them to speak up. Inviting people to be sort of part of job interviews as well, so to be on the hiring side has been quite good in terms of, have one person who has done it before is driving the interview, but have your new person there as well. And over time, I've seen people just sort of start to ask more and more questions, and that has really driven that communications sort of stuff, or have questions asked them that only they can answer. And so things like that have been really good too.
Aspect that I found worked really well is also getting people to present. So whether it's sprint demos or even the work that they're doing, maybe they have something exciting that might be quite novel within the company. So running brown bag sessions or sharing with other people helps them gain that confidence in that area.
I was going to say that, like chapters and guilds. I think chapters and guilds can be like starting with chapters, because chapters are like more localized. Guilds can be quite massive. One of the issues, or one of the things that I've noticed is like people will happily go to chapters because they're like localized to your platform. But when it comes to guilds are bigger than chapters, and people usually it's mostly the more experienced engineers who will show up in guilds. I
might need those terms explained to me. I don't know the difference between a chapter and a guild.
Oh, so chapter is kind of like, so we have like a mobile test chapter within our mobile community, and then we have Android chapter, we have iOS chapter. So chapter is kind of like a community where all the Android developers, let's say Android chapter, all the Android developers will come in, they will meet once every fortnight, and they will discuss any problems, any hard issues they've got right now. Similarly, like at BNZ, a few years ago, me and a few others, we started a testing guild, BNZ testing guild. And then at BNZ, we have guilds across like everything, like API guild, microservices guild, and guilds are massive. They're like across the bank.
Gotcha. And so they're levels of separation.
Yeah, they're levels of separation, but chapters, like encouraging people to go to chapter meetings and presenting and contributing. And I think as part of, don't quote me on this because I'm a contractor with BNZ, but from what I've heard from the permanent employees is that how much you contribute to chapter and guilds is also kind of like people leads encourage the employees to do that, and it is part of their performance review. Or like if you do contribute, that is
probably. It would probably be common for it to be on a career level or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, but chapter and guilds can be quite important. But one thing that you have to notice is that I think as seniors and as leaders, you have to encourage, because majority of the times, because chapter and guilds they're mostly on volunteer, like you have to be a volunteer, and usually the same person ends up volunteering all the time. So you have to make sure, like for me, I am more interested in being part of the governing body rather than running the chapters, so that everyone gets a chance to speak. I have been in chapters where there is just like one obvious champion and there is no space for others to grow. So as an engineering manager and as an engineering leader, you have to watch out for that. And I think this is where you need more and more chapter champions and guild champions.
There's lots of stuff around that, right? Just
we've gone off
who runs
topic
a
now.
meeting.
Yeah, exactly. We've gone off topic now, but just
all right, let's bring it back. What's a cross-functional team?
What is a cross-functional team? So the way I view cross-functional teams are a team where responsibilities are shared, but ownership is clearly defined. So by that, I mean it helps the team be more reactive, more flexible, right? Tomorrow, if your backend engineer decides to go on a 1 week long holiday, and they should be able to do that, it doesn't mean that everything grinds all to a standstill because no one can work on the API anymore. You have people that can sort of fill in the role, and this also helps, reduce the buzz factor within your team. The same also goes with working with design and testers and product and so on, so that when decisions need to be made if the person is not available for a reason. And this touch is back to what we were discussing earlier. You have the skill and the capability and the feel of ownership to be able to make that decision.
Yeah. For me, the easiest way to understand is a vertical slice or a horizontal slice. So if it's a brand new feature, and you need to take this feature or the MVP of the feature all the way to production. And especially if it's a vertical slice, which is like across the technical stack, like it should be available on the front end and the back end, and then you have the microservices in the middle driving it. So your one team is capable of developing and delivering that feature to production, which means that particular team will have front end developers, will have middleware, API developers, and will also have backend engineers and anything that you need, like designers, testers, and then we have horizontal slices where you're just working on like maybe a web-based solution, and all your team does is just like web. You just kind of like worked on React, JS, and that's all you do. And everyone in your team just works on that. In the bad old days, in my first job, I was hired as a tester, and we were on the floor of a building. We were on the testers' floor, and all the testers sat together, and we could not. I said we could not. It was discouraged to go to the other floors and talk to developers. We all just took the testing work as it came in from wherever. And that, when I think of cross-functional, I think of the opposite of that, right? It's, we had one function that was testing. We were the team. And there's just a whole lot of stuff missing from any work you were doing, context, any engagement with the people working on this thing. Often you would find a bug and log it, and it would whisker off to the development team. Who knows if it went to the same developer that worked on it originally or not, because they wouldn't talk to each other, all that sort of stuff. And so why is it important, and how does it relate to this concept of being T-shaped?
I think this helps drive the point of the team being more reactive, right? One of the things that we can look at with in looking at a team to be able to see, how well the team is running is how reactive they are to change. My view is that you should be able to be flexible because things change all the time. You may think that, that this is something that's very clearly well cut and defined, but there's always a spanner that's thrown in the works, or priorities change, or the market changes, right? So it's good for the team to be reactive and to be flexible, to be able to go, look, all hands on deck. We need to be able to ship this now, or we need to be able to, make these changes, so and so, and people are able to communicate and work in a manner that gets that across. Yeah.
And you also have a really good idea of where your dependencies and your roadblocks are across the organization. So if you're working on a vertical slice, you could either go back to the old waterfall model where, like the back end starts ahead of you, and then the APIs and the front end is the last one to catch up. And then you realize that the front end teams cannot start working on the feature because they have a dependency on back end and APIs. And I think that's where the entire vertical slices versus horizontal slices model came through. Because if you're working on a vertical slice, then you have a really, really good idea of what your dependencies are up front, and then you can cater your time for that entire to solve that problem.
And it's also a good sanity check or a gotcha check, because working in an area, your focus can be quite narrow, and you may make assumptions that may not generally be true. So it's good to have a different perspective on on the things, to be able to sanity check you and make sure that, okay, these assumptions still hold. Maybe this is still usable. Yeah. Right? Is it still delivering value? And so on.
Yeah. It's a funny example, personal story. So I used to work on mobile, like I've told several times, and I used to be on like mobile only times. And then and majority of the places that I used to work, and this is before like cross-functional was a thing. Like the APIs will be developed first, and then the mobile platforms or the websites are catching up to them, and then it's too late to actually change the APIs. And then I started working on vertical slices and cross-functional teams where the APIs are actually driven by the front end. So it's been a complete shift, and it's been quite an interesting thing to watch and participate. Yeah.
It's probably worth diving into a little bit, what can go wrong as well. Like, is there any disadvantages to sort of shooting to a goal of being a T-shaped engineer, or sort of, you've got a cross-functional team? What could go wrong there? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the way I see it is, for something like this to work, ownership definitely needs to be clearly defined. If you end up with multiple people owning various areas and that's not clearly defined, you can end up with confusion because people might expect others to do a certain aspect of the role, or if a decision needs to be made, the tiebreaker might not be very well obvious or clear, and so things can just keep churning and churning without any significant progress being made.
Practically speaking, like, the idea of a cross-functional team is really great. And there are places where these things, like cross-functional teams, are quite successful, but it's hard. Like, being in a cross-functional team is hard. Hiring people to be in a T-shaped role or to be more cross-platform or full stack is hard. It takes time. And from my personal experience, again, I think companies need to be aware of this, that it's not like you can just go to the market and you will have a line of kind of like full stack engineers, willing to apply for that role. So you need to groom people, and you need to allow for time and space for your engineers to grow into those T-shaped roles.
Because it might not exactly be faster at the start, right?
Exactly.
As people are learning, as they're building, the skill required, it will eventually, you will get there. But at the start, it might even have a negative impact because your more senior team members have to then step in and help and coach and guide people. So you might actually end up losing, I hate this word, but productivity. So as to speak.
Yeah. It's kind of a slow down to speed up. You'll slow down now, but over time, you're going to excel from this stuff, right?
Yeah. And this is one of the things that I've been kind of like working on, kind of like with some of the people where I work currently, is that you want to decide where you want to place, like where you want to place the engineers. So if you're like, so we want to hire people that are willing to be more T-shaped, to be more full stack and cross-functional, but it's a skill that you have to develop. So you need to choose a time that's not on like working critical, like mission critical features, because it's going to be way too cognitively taxing, and they'll probably end up quitting, So you need to find like a team that's working on a standalone feature and just like, they can go in where people can develop those skills.
I think a lot of it also depends on company culture. If you have an environment where, mistakes are acceptable, and you have this environment where it's okay to, for things to go wrong, we'll run a blameless debrief on it, and then, create mitigations that help reinforce and prevent those problems from happening again, then I think that's fine, because then people are comfortable making mistakes, asking questions that, that might be dumb to them, but are not really. And this helps really build up the team and be more productive.
Yeah. One thing that I want to add is, again, just from my personal experience and probably a personal opinion, it's nice to have a specialization and an expertise on one thing. You don't want to make a career out of, and again, just a personal opinion, it probably sounds like a strong opinion. I think it's nice to have a specialization in one thing, whether it's web development or automation testing or mobile development or microservices or whatever you do. Rather than like being an expert at like everything, because there can be quite a everything, but you don't know anything very well. So just to safeguard yourself and to prove your CV and to create like better future opportunities for yourself, I would still advise everyone to be like specialized on one, and then have a knowledge of everything else that you can, like in a few weeks, you can be up and running on like other things as well.
You wouldn't want to be the sideways eye, but what we're looking for really is the T shape, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. The thing I wanted to sort of append to that is that, you don't have to know straight away what you want that specialization to be. Most people I've observed that it comes out naturally, based on what they work on, what they find interesting. And, you wake up 20 years later and you're an API specialist, right? It just kind of, that's the way it goes. I don't want any sort of juniors to be watching this and going, oh, geez, I have to pick DevOps or front end now, or I'm going to, destroy my career. It's not like that at all. These things develop over time. Yeah.
So DevOps is usually, so the way we do DevOps is it's like majority of us who have a specialization in one thing. Now we are learning to move to DevOps, but people who are actually joining as like a start of their career as DevOps engineer, what would their T be like? So they're expert in like DevOps, then like what else? Like they start learning front end, microservices, like stuff like that.
Yeah, I think exactly.
It's an interesting thing to think about. Yeah.
Well, I think it depends where your interests really lie. I find that if you're naturally curious and interested in it, then you will be able to identify opportunities and work in that area. But that's not saying if you're not naturally curious and not actually interested, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think at the end of the day, it can still be a job for some people, and that's okay, right? But being able to, if you're in the DevOps area, just understanding how is the sausage made, really, to be more precise, right? How does code get written? How does that? How is it built? How's it tested? And understanding that whole process then help make your work easier, because then you can understand how you fit into the bigger puzzle. Yeah.
And assuming like the three of us, we've come through like specialization in one. Because we understand the application development lifecycle, or how the applications are developed, whether it's web, mobile, or backend. I think it's given us a good platform to understand how DevOps and the other things work. And I find myself to be in a fortunate situation where, because I already understand how applications are developed, it's much easier to understand how DevOps and how releases and how configurations and all of those things work. I think like understanding how applications are developed, right? Like I think that's a like. Yeah, like if you, I would encourage people, if you have an opportunity to be part of a team, even for 6 months, to see how applications are actually developed, how web developers are actually developing the application. And same applies for like product owners and BAs as well, right? Like to be part of a team where you are building a feature. Like I think it's really nice to understand like how a feature is built, how an application is actually developed. Yeah. Yep. That experience, like that experience is priceless.
Because I think at the end it all ties down to the user, right? Everything that you do, it's how does it impact them? Now the user might not care whether you're running on the latest version of Java or your backend is written in Rust, and so on. But how does all of that boil down to the user? What does it mean, to have good DevOps
customer value,
or CI/CD for the user? And being able to quantify that and understanding that okay, if we are able to deploy quickly, it means that bugs and are fixed quicker. We can deliver features faster. The general user experience is a lot nicer then, because they get what they want. Is really tying that whole process all together.
Yeah, and that's what the T should look like, right? So everyone who doesn't know application development lifecycle or hasn't had an opportunity should probably seek that opportunity. And people who've been primarily in application development, they should probably seek opportunities to be in more like DevOps and SRE role, cloud engineer roles, so that we have that cross pollination and we are all becoming more T-shaped.
And if you have the opportunity and your company supports it, I would highly recommend participating in customer interviews or user interviews. Even if you can talk directly to your users, even better. I think it doesn't matter what role you have, whether you're a backend engineer, front engineer, a DevOps engineer, or a test engineer. Being able to gain that insight directly on how all of this comes together, I think, will help you be way more successful in your role than anything else that you can do.
Exactly. This is an amazing conversation. Thank you so much, Raoul. Thank you so much for your time.
Camy likes us to end with like a trick or tough question. So I would like to ask.
Yeah. Go, James, go.
Do you have something in the bank already?
You go.
So one thing we haven't talked about, Raoul, you're an engineering manager, I'm an engineering manager. Where does management fit into this? Can you be a T-shaped manager? What does that look like?
Good man.
I think the general consensus is to be an egg-shaped manager, but generally I feel as a manager, you're sort of there holding an umbrella over your team, so sort of blocking them from any issues that might not be relevant to them, but also making sure that you're filling in any gaps where needed in your team. So making sure that the whole machinery moves smoothly in there. I think it's very hard to define specifically what you do, because that can be very different between different teams, different companies. I've been a manager at a couple of places, and my role has changed actually quite significantly between one company to the other. So it's very hard to clearly define where a manager is, but I think the easiest way I can boil it down to is to say you sort of help fill in the gaps, and you make sure that everything is running smoothly, so that you are the person taking a step back, while everyone is boiled down in the details, to making sure that we are still on target, things are still working as intended, and things are communicated across to the right stakeholders.
That is a solid answer to something I threw at you with no warning. So nice.
Yeah, nice one. Mine is, I think I've already given you a heads up, and this is something that I've been struggling with. And it's a really hard one to nail down. It's team metrics, because the team metrics for teams that are working on vertical slices, what we call full stack teams across functional teams, and teams that work on horizontal slices, those team metrics look quite different. And from everything that I've read, majority of the agile practices and like those agile metrics, they're usually shaped more for teams that are working on horizontal slices, not on vertical slices. So how do you manage that? Like for example, my team, we work across 4 platforms, and the way our stories move across our board it depends on the technical stack that we work on. So it's really hard to get that average, like a good average of how much time it would take for a full stack team across functional time to deliver this feature.
Metrics by itself, so I'll start off by saying, can be a very controversial topic.
Yes.
One caveat with any metric is that whatever you measure ends up becoming the goal, and people will, I'd say, ridiculously optimize for that metric.
Which is an anti-pattern, right? It's an anti-pattern. That's not why we have metrics.
People will find a way to optimize for that, right? And that's human nature.
Yeah.
Now, in saying that, what I generally tend to do is focus less on aspects that I find are superficial. And I know in some companies it's common to look at, lines of code, which I think is a bad thing to look at, or how many pull requests someone is looking at, or how many reviews they're doing. And I like to take a more holistic view across the thing and say, how fast are we delivering work to the customer? So, purely by that I mean is cycle time. I feel that that's sort of like the one metric which ties everything in together, but it's at a level that you don't need to ruthlessly optimize for things by saying, hey, there's a pull request that's popped up. Everyone needs to look at it in the next 30 seconds. So you sort of still maintain that flexibility and provide people with the buffers they need, while making sure that on an average you can get a feel of how long does it take for work to go through your entire process. And there are various things you can do to make sure that things flow in smoothly. You can size tickets to roughly the same size to ensure you get that predictability that you need. But I find that cycle time is sort of a good measure for most teams to be able to measure. And it is something that I find works across both horizontally sliced teams and vertically sliced teams, because you still end up in sort of the same patterns and flow. But with some of the other metrics, I definitely agree that they can be optimized, or they might look better if you operate in a certain manner.
Yeah, that's again a good answer. Thanks, Raoul.
No problem.
Cool. All right, we're closing in on the hour, and I wanted to definitely try and finish within the hour this time. I think we did like an hour 20 last time, right? So, not that I don't enjoy the conversation, but we want to sort of stick to our goals. Look, thank you, Raoul, for joining us. It is always a pleasure to chat and to gain some wisdom from you. So really appreciate it. thank you, Camy, for hosting once again. And thank you for everyone for watching. This has been the Tech Engineering Lounge. Camy, I'll leave it to you to do the like and subscribe spiel.
Please like, share, and subscribe.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, I think we have. Was there Raoul? Sorry.
No, thank you so much for inviting me over, Camy. It's been an absolute blast. I've learned a lot, which is why talking to both of you.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Yeah, well, we'll probably have you again because Atlassian is such a cool place. I want to talk about the QE engineering. The entire QE engineers. We'll have you back. Thank you so much for joining us, and please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you in a fortnight or so. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks all.
Bye.
See yous.
Bye.